On the quietest afternoon of the summer, beneath the sprawling branches of an ancient oak tree that had stood longer than anyone in the city could remember, the most feared man in the underworld lay perfectly still. His navy blue suit looked too expensive to belong on the grass. The white shirt beneath it was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the dark tattoos that climbed across his chest and neck like reminders of a violent life he could never escape from a distance. He looked asleep, peaceful, almost ordinary. No one passing outside the towering iron gates would ever believe the truth. The man resting beneath that tree was Damiano Dom Rossi, the ruthless head of the Rossi crime family, a name spoken in whispers by politicians, judges, businessmen, and rival gangsters alike. Some called him a king. Others called him a monster. To his enemies, he was the last face they hoped never to see. Yet on that afternoon, there was no bodyguard standing over him, no meeting waiting, no weapons drawn. For one stolen hour, Damiano wanted impossible. Silence. He wasn't really sleeping. He was pretending that he wasn't responsible for hundreds of lives, pretending that another shipment wasn't crossing the docks before sunset, pretending that another family wasn't planning to kill him before the week ended, pretending that the weight pressing against his chest every morning simply didn't exist. Sometimes pretending was the closest thing to peace he could find. He closed his eyes tighter as a gentle breeze stirred the leaves overhead. Birds chirped somewhere beyond the gardens. The fountain nearby splashed softly against polished stone. It was strange. Inside the mansion behind him, 40 armed men patrolled every hallway. Outside, nature acted as though violence had never existed. He wished he could believe it. But the world always found him. Always. Except, on this particular afternoon, something found him first. Not an assassin. Not a rival. Not another traitor. A little girl, far across the estate. Tiny footsteps skipped across the stone pathway. A butterfly, bright orange with black-tipped wings, floated lazily over rows of blooming flowers before drifting toward the old oak tree. Laughing to herself, 3-year-old Luna Marino chased after it with a determination only a child could possess. "Wait," she giggled. "I'm going to catch you." The butterfly ignored her completely. It danced over a hedge, circled the fountain, then disappeared beneath the enormous branches where the sleeping stranger rested. Luna slowed to a stop. Her small pink shoes sank slightly into the soft grass. She blinked. Someone was sleeping outside. That seemed strange. Adults always told children not to sleep outdoors, especially in the afternoon. She tilted her head, studying the handsome man beneath the tree. His eyebrows were furrowed, even while he slept. His face looked tired. Not angry, not scary, just sad. The little girl looked around. No one else seemed to notice him. She frowned. "Poor uncle," she whispered to herself. "He looks lonely." Without the slightest hint of fear, Luna walked closer. One careful step, then another. Damiano heard the faint rustle of grass beneath tiny shoes. His instinct sharpened immediately. Someone was approaching. Too light to be an adult. Too careless to be an assassin. He almost opened his eyes. Almost. Instead, curiosity stopped him. The footsteps came closer, then stopped beside him. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then he felt something so unexpected that every instinct inside him froze. A tiny hand rested gently against his chest. Warm, weightless, trusting. Before he could react, another tiny movement followed. The little girl carefully climbed beside him, using his shoulder like a pillow before curling into a comfortable little ball against his side. She sighed happily, closed her eyes, and within moments, she had fallen asleep. Damiano's heartbeat stumbled. No one had touched him like that in nearly 20 years. Not without permission, not without fear, not without wanting something in return. Slowly, very slowly, he opened his eyes. The afternoon sunlight filtered through thousands of green leaves above him. For a long moment, he simply stared at the sleeping child resting against his chest. Her tiny fingers still clutched the fabric of his shirt. Her cheek rested above the faded scar that crossed his heart. She looked completely safe, completely certain that nothing bad could happen while she slept there. A strange feeling tightened inside him. He couldn't remember the last time someone had trusted him without knowing who he was, without expecting money, power, protection, or revenge. This child knew none of those things. To her, he was simply someone who looked like he needed company. A smile, small, uncertain, and almost forgotten, began to tug at the corner of Damiano Rossi's mouth. Hidden behind a row of sculpted hedges, 2 security guards watched the unbelievable scene with widening eyes. One instinctively reached for the radio clipped to his shoulder. The other quickly grabbed his arm. Don't. But just don't. Neither man had ever seen their boss smile. Neither had ever seen anyone touch him without permission. And neither wanted to be the fool who interrupted whatever miracle they were witnessing. At that exact moment, a terrified voice shattered the silence. Luna, the little girl's mother, came sprinting across the garden, her cleaning apron fluttering behind her. Natalie Marino's face turned white the instant she saw her daughter sleeping peacefully on the chest of the city's most feared Mafia boss. The basket of freshly folded towels slipped from her hands. White sheets scattered across the grass like fallen snow. Her breathing stopped. Every terrible story she had heard about Damiano Rossi raced through her mind. Her knees nearly gave way. "Oh, my God!" she whispered. "Luna, what have you done?" She expected to see a furious crime lord. She expected shouting. She expected armed guards rushing forward. She expected the worst mistake of her life, to become the last mistake her daughter would ever make. Instead, Damiano Rossi gently raised one finger to his lips. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Please." He looked down at the little girl, sleeping peacefully against his heart. "Don't wake her." Luna Marino had never cared much for rules when a butterfly was involved. The bright orange butterfly drifted lazily through the estate gardens, fluttering just beyond her tiny fingertips as though inviting her to play. Every time she thought she was close enough to catch it, the little creature floated a little farther away. "Come back!" she giggled, her laughter echoing across the manicured lawn. "I only want to say hello." Her tiny pink shoes padded over the stone walkway before sinking into the lush green grass. The butterfly circled a marble fountain sparkling beneath the afternoon sun, danced over a bed of blooming roses, then glided toward the oldest tree on the Rossi estate. The enormous oak spread its branches like protective arms across a wide patch of cool shade. The butterfly disappeared beneath it. Luna hurried after it, slowing only when she noticed someone already resting there. A man. He looked as though he had fallen asleep beneath the tree. She stopped a few feet away and tilted her head. Children notice things adults often missed. She noticed the expensive blue suit that somehow didn't belong on the grass. She noticed the white shirt hanging open at the collar. She noticed the intricate black tattoos climbing across his neck and disappearing beneath the fabric. Most of all, she noticed the sadness on his face. Even while pretending to sleep, Damiano Rossi couldn't completely hide the weight he carried. His brow remained slightly furrowed. His breathing was slow but heavy. It reminded Luna of the nights when her mommy cried quietly after believing she had already fallen asleep. The little girl looked around. No one else was nearby. The butterfly had vanished. For a moment, she simply stared at the stranger. "He must be very tired," she whispered. She remembered something her mother often did after long days at work. Whenever Luna accidentally fell asleep on the sofa, Natalie would quietly place a blanket over her and gently stroke her hair until she woke up smiling. Maybe grown-ups needed someone to make them feel better too. Luna smiled to herself. "Don't worry," she said softly. "I'll keep you company." She walked closer, each tiny step careful enough not to wake him. Only a few feet away now, she could see faint lines around his eyes, as though he hadn't smiled in a very long time. She reached out with one tiny finger. Very gently, she poked his arm. Nothing happened. She giggled. "You really are sleepy." Damiano heard every word. Years of surviving assassination attempts had sharpened his instincts beyond imagination. He had sensed someone entering the garden almost a minute earlier. The footsteps were far too light to belong to an armed man. Too uneven, too innocent. He had nearly opened his eyes. Then he heard the tiny voice. Curiosity won. He remained perfectly still. Now he felt a tiny finger poking his sleeve. A child. Somehow, a child had wandered into the most heavily guarded estate in the city. He expected frightened footsteps running away the moment she noticed the tattoos or the scars. Instead, the little girl moved even closer. Luna studied his face one last time. "My mommy says people shouldn't sleep alone." She nodded as though she had solved a very important problem. "I'll help." Before the feared Mafia boss could even process what was happening, Luna carefully climbed onto grass beside him. She rested one small hand against his chest. His heartbeat thumped steadily beneath her palm. "So warm," she whispered, using his shoulder as though it always belonged there. She curled against him with complete trust. Her tiny legs tucked beneath her pink dress. Her cheeks settled lightly over the faded scar hidden beneath his shirt. Within seconds, she released a long, contented sigh. The excitement of chasing butterflies had exhausted her. Her eyelids fluttered once, twice, then closed completely. She was asleep. Damiano's entire body froze. The sensation was almost unbearable. It wasn't fear. It wasn't danger. It was something far more unfamiliar. Gentleness. No one had rested against him like this since he was a young man. Not after his father died. Not after violence became the language of his world. Every touch since then had carried suspicion, ambition, loyalty, or betrayal. This one carried none of those things. Only trust. Slowly, very slowly, he opened his eyes. The first thing he saw was a tiny strand of chestnut hair blowing gently across the little girl's face. Without thinking, he carefully brushed it aside. She smiled in her sleep. Her tiny fingers instinctively tightened around his shirt. The simple gesture struck him harder than any bullet ever had. For reasons he couldn't explain, the knot that had lived inside his chest for years seemed to loosen. A breeze rustled through the branches above. The world felt strangely quiet. Even the guard stationed discreetly around the estate stared from a distance, uncertain whether they should intervene. None of them had ever witnessed their boss remain this still, or this gentle. One guard reached toward the radio clipped to his shoulder. Another quickly grabbed his wrist. No. What if... Look at him. The first guard looked again. Damiano Rossi wasn't angry. He wasn't reaching for the pistol hidden beneath his jacket. He wasn't ordering anyone removed. He simply sat beneath the old oak tree, watching over his sleeping toddler as though protecting the most precious thing in the world. Neither guard understood what they were seeing. Neither dared interrupt it. Across the estate, Natalie Marino pushed her cleaning cart out of the west wing after finishing another guest suite. She wiped the sweat from her forehead and glanced at the small watch strapped around her wrist. Too quiet. Luna had been quiet for far too long. Every mother's instinct tightened inside her. She abandoned the cart and hurried toward the servants' quarters. "Luna?" she called softly. No answer. She checked the kitchen. Empty. The pantry. Empty. The laundry room. Nothing. Her heartbeat quickened. "Luna?" Her voice grew louder. Cooks and housekeepers looked up in confusion. One of the kitchen staff frowned. "I thought she was with you." Natalie's blood ran cold. She rushed to the back corridor and burst into Gardens, her eyes scanning every path with mounting panic. "Luna!" Her voice cracked. Then she saw the old oak tree, and beneath it, her daughter, sleeping peacefully against the chest of Damiano Rossi. Natalie's basket of freshly folded linens slipped from her trembling hands. White towels scattered across the grass. Her legs nearly gave out beneath her. Every terrifying rumor she'd heard about the Rossi family flashed through her mind in an instant. She couldn't breathe. "Oh, dear God!" she whispered, horror filling her eyes. "Luna, what have you done?" Natalie couldn't breathe. Her heart pounded so violently she thought it might burst through her chest. Every terrifying rumor she had heard during her 3 weeks at the Rossi estate crashed through her mind at once. They said Damiano Rossi had built his empire without mercy. They said men twice his size trembled when he entered a room. They said one careless mistake could cost someone everything. And now, her 3-year-old daughter was asleep on his chest. Natalie stumbled forward before stopping herself. If she ran toward Luna, would the guards think she was attacking their boss? If she called out loudly, would she startle them into anger? She didn't know. All she knew was that one wrong move might destroy the only future she had managed to build for her little girl. Her knees weakened. I'm so sorry," she whispered, tears already filling her eyes. "Please forgive her. She doesn't know any better." Damiano slowly lifted his eyes to meet hers. There was no fury in them, no cold glare, only quiet exhaustion. He glanced down at the little girl sleeping peacefully against him before returning his gaze to Natalie. "Lower your voice," he said softly. "You'll wake her." Natalie blinked. For a second, she wondered if she had heard him correctly. Damiano carefully adjusted the sleeve of his jacket, shielding Luna's face from a ray of afternoon sunlight filtering through the branches. "She's tired." His voice remained calm. "Let her sleep?" Natalie's mouth fell slightly open. Nothing about this matched the man everyone described. She had prepared herself to beg, to cry, perhaps even to throw herself at his feet. Instead, the most feared Mafia boss in the city was worried about a child's nap. "I'm sorry," she repeated, her voice shaking. She followed a butterfly. I looked away for just a moment. "I know." "You know?" I heard her. His eyes drifted back to Luna. She announced to the butterfly that she was going to catch it. Despite himself, the corner of his mouth lifted ever so slightly. Apparently she lost. Natalie stared in disbelief. Had he just made a joke? Before she could answer, Luna stirred gently. Her tiny nose wrinkled. She rubbed one sleepy eye before looking up into Damiano's face. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Luna smiled as though she were greeting an old friend. "Hi, sleepy uncle." Several guards standing nearby immediately looked away, pretending not to listen. Damiano had faced armed assassins without blinking. Yet somehow, those 3 innocent words left him completely defenseless. "Hello," he replied quietly. "Did I wake you?" Luna asked. "You took a very comfortable nap." She looked embarrassed. "I did. You did." She patted his chest thoughtfully. "You looked lonely." The words landed harder than she could ever understand. Nobody had asked Damiano how he felt in years. People asked for orders, permission, money, protection, never loneliness. Luna reached up and gently touched the tattoo curling around his neck. "Does this hurt?" "No, it looks sad." He gave a faint chuckle. "I suppose it does." Satisfied with the answer, Luna wrapped both little arms around his neck in an unexpected hug. "You're not lonely anymore." For a moment, time itself seemed to stop. Damiano slowly closed his eyes. He hadn't been hugged since before his father's funeral. The simple embrace loosened something buried deep inside him, something years of violence, betrayal, and bloodshed had buried beneath stone. When Luna pulled away, she grinned proudly. "There." "What?" "I fixed it." Natalie covered her mouth, trying to hide a nervous smile through her tears. "I'm so sorry," she whispered again. "You don't have to apologize," Damiano said. She looked at him in astonishment. Children shouldn't apologize for being kind. He carefully stood, making sure Luna remained comfortably in his arms. The little girl rested her head against his shoulder without hesitation. She trusted him completely. That frightened Natalie almost as much as everything else. Damiano turned toward the mansion, for guards instinctively straightened, opened the front entrance. The men exchanged confused glances. "The front entrance, boss?" Did I stutter? "No, sir. It had never been used for servants." Natalie immediately shook her head. "We use the service entrance." "Not today." She froze. Damiano looked back at her. "Your daughter is my guest." The words echoed through the silent garden. "My guest? You are her mother." He gave a small nod. "Which makes you my guest as well." One guard hurried ahead to open the enormous oak doors leading into the mansion. Inside, conversation stopped almost instantly. Housekeepers paused with polishing cloths in their hands. Chefs leaned out from the kitchen. Security men stood perfectly still. Every eye followed the impossible sight before them. Damiano Rossi, carrying a sleepy little girl through the front entrance. Behind him walked the terrified maid. The silence became almost unbearable. The elderly butler, Vittorio, recovered first. "Boss!" Damiano's voice remained calm. "Prepare one of the East guest suites." Vittorio blinked. "For whom, sir?" He glanced toward Luna. "For our guests." "Our?" The old butler caught himself immediately. "Yes, sir. And send someone to buy children's books." Several staff members looked at one another. Children's books? Toys as well. Damiano continued. "A teddy bear." He glanced at Luna sleeping against his shoulder. "And butterflies." Natalie couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You don't have to do this." "I know, but I want to." Those simple words silenced every objection. Over the following days, the impossible continued. The empty east wing slowly transformed. A small reading corner appeared beside one of the sunny windows. A rocking chair was carried upstairs. Fresh flowers replaced expensive sculptures. Colorful storybooks filled shelves that had once displayed antique weapons. Someone even placed butterfly stickers on the nursery walls. No one admitted who had bought them. The staff already knew. The mansion began changing in quieter ways, too. Laughter echoed through hallways that had known only footsteps and whispered orders. Kitchen staff started baking cookies because Luna declared ordinary biscuits too serious. Gardeners found themselves creating tiny flower patches after she announced butterflies needed restaurants. Even the guards standing outside the gate smiled when the little girl marched past each morning, saluting every one of them before announcing they were tree protectors. And at the center of it all stood Damiano Rossi. Every evening, despite mountains of paperwork and endless meetings, he found himself wandering toward the garden. Some evenings, Luna insisted he push her on the old wooden swing beneath the oak tree. Other evenings, she climbed into his lap with another picture book, convinced he needed practice reading dragon voices properly. "You made the dragon too scary." she informed him one night. Dragons can be nice. I'll remember that. No, she giggled. You have to practice. For the first time in years, the halls of the Rossi mansion no longer felt like a fortress. They felt alive, and though Damiano would never have admitted aloud, every innocent laugh from the little girl chipped away at the walls around his heart walls that bullets had never broken. But kindness was quietly beginning to bring down. Morning sunlight poured through the towering windows of the Rossi mansion, painting long golden streaks across the polished marble floors. For years, breakfast had been nothing more than another appointment on Damiano Rossi's schedule. A cup of black coffee, a newspaper filled with reports of markets, politics, and violence. Meetings beginning before the toast had cooled. Silence had always been his only companion. Until Luna arrived. The little girl burst into the dining room wearing yellow overalls covered with tiny embroidered butterflies, her brown curls bouncing with every excited step. Good morning, sleepy uncle. Her cheerful voice echoed off the high ceilings. Several servants instinctively smiled before quickly hiding it. Damiano looked up from his untouched coffee. Good morning. Luna frowned. That's too little. What is your good morning? She climbed onto the chair beside him without waiting for permission. It has to sound happy. He raised an eyebrow. And how does a happy good morning sound? She spread both arms dramatically. Good morning. The shout startled two pigeons perched outside the window. One of the younger guards standing by the door nearly laughed before catching himself. Damiano looked at the child's bright smile. Then, very quietly, the corners of his mouth lifted. Good morning, he repeated, this time with just enough warmth to satisfy her. There! Luna clapped proudly. See? That wasn't hard. Natalie entered a moment later, carrying embarrassment on her face. Luna, how many times have I told you not to shout indoors? But he smiled. Natalie glanced toward Damiano. To her surprise, he actually had. I'm sorry, she said. You apologize too much, Damiano replied calmly. Luna nodded enthusiastically. I keep telling Mommy that. Natalie covered her face with one hand. I don't think you've ever told me that. I was thinking it. The dining room erupted with quiet laughter. Even Vittorio, the elderly butler who had served the Rossi family for over 3 decades, allowed himself a rare smile. Something impossible had happened to the mansion. People laughed now. Breakfast slowly became a tradition. Every morning Luna insisted on sitting beside Damiano, asking endless questions that no one else in the city would ever dare ask. Why do you wear suits every day? They're comfortable. They look itchy. They're not. Can you run fast? I suppose. Faster than butterflies? I've never raced one. You should. Natalie would watch from across the table, often hiding her smile behind a coffee cup. She couldn't understand how the feared Mafia boss always found patience for every ridiculous question. No meeting was ever too important. No phone call interrupted Luna's stories. For those few peaceful mornings, Damiano belonged to no empire, only to breakfast. The afternoons belonged to the gardens. The ancient oak tree quickly became Luna's favorite place on the estate. Every day she invented a new adventure. Some afternoons they searched for butterflies. Others they collected smooth stones from beside the fountain. Occasionally she insisted every squirrel on the property had its own name. That's Mr. Fluffy. There are 3 squirrels. They're all Mr. Fluffy. Damiano accepted this without argument. Natalie often walked a few steps behind them, quietly watching the unlikely pair. Luna never seemed to notice the expensive watches, tailored suits, or heavily armed guards surrounding the estate. To her, Damiano was simply the tall man who listened, who always slowed his pace, so her tiny legs could keep up, who patiently waited while she examined every flower as though discovering it for the first time. One afternoon, she slipped her tiny hand into his. It happened, so naturally neither of them realized it at first. His large, scarred hand completely surrounded hers. Natalie noticed. So did several bodyguards. None of them spoke. The sight somehow felt too precious to interrupt. As they reached the old oak tree, Luna looked up. My hand fits. It does. When I grow bigger, she squeezed his fingers. Will my hand be like yours? He looked down at the scars crossing his knuckles. I hope not. She frowned. Why? Because these came from making bad choices. She thought carefully before answering. I'll make good ones. I believe you will. Evenings brought story time. What had started with one picture book had somehow become a nightly ritual. Every evening, shortly before bedtime, Luna would appear outside Damiano's study, carrying another book almost as large as herself. Knock, knock, knock. The door opened. Busy? His desk would be covered with contracts, maps, financial reports, security briefings. Yet, somehow, no. You promise? I promise. She marched inside triumphantly. Dragon story tonight. Again, they're improving. Damiano leaned back in a leather chair, while Luna climbed comfortably onto the sofa beside him. She corrected every dragon voice, every princess voice, every knight voice. No, no, she laughed. The dragon sounds grumpy. He is grumpy. He needs a friend. Damiano found himself laughing. I suppose he does. Natalie sometimes paused outside the half-open study door while coming to collect her daughter. She never interrupted. Instead, she watched quietly. She saw something few people ever had. The feared Mafia boss sitting cross-legged on an expensive Persian rug while a 3-year-old corrected his storytelling. She wondered what kind of man he might have become had life been kinder to him. Late at night, after Luna had fallen asleep, the mansion returned to its familiar silence. Natalie often wandered onto the rear terrace, carrying a cup of tea, enjoying the cool evening breeze before another day began. More than once she found Damiano already there, looking across the moonlit gardens. Neither hurried to speak. Sometimes silence itself was enough. One evening she finally broke it. You don't sleep much. No, nightmares. He was quiet for several seconds. Memories. She nodded gently. I understand. He turned toward her. You do? My father died when I was 19. She looked out across the gardens. Some night's grief doesn't knock. It simply sits beside you. For the first time in years, someone understood without asking for details. You've been carrying yours alone, she continued softly. So have you. She smiled sadly. I suppose I have. A comfortable silence settled between them. The fountain murmured quietly somewhere beyond the roses. Fireflies drifted to the darkness like tiny floating stars. You know, Natalie said after a while, Luna thinks you're lonely. Damiano gave a faint smile. She's told me. I've never seen her trust someone so quickly. I've never had someone trust me at all. She looked at him, not the feared Mafia boss, not the powerful leader whose name frightened an entire city. Just a lonely man sitting beneath the weight of years he never chose. You know what I see? She asked. What? A man who spent so long protecting everyone else that no one ever thought to protect him. Her words settled deep inside him. No accusation, no fear, only quiet understanding. He looked toward the oak tree, where everything had begun. For years, this mansion had been nothing more than a fortress, a place built to keep enemies out and emotions locked away. Now laughter echoed through its halls. Butterflies had become important. Storybooks covered tables once reserved for weapons and ledgers. Breakfast lasted longer than meetings. And every night, a little girl slept peacefully under the same roof, believing without question that the city's most feared Mafia boss would always keep her safe. For the first time since inheriting the Rossi Empire, Damiano no longer returned to an empty house. Without realizing it, he had found something he had never possessed before. Not power, not loyalty, not respect. A home. The first sign that something was wrong arrived before sunrise. Damiano Rossi stood alone in his study, the city still wrapped in darkness beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. A steaming cup of black coffee rested untouched beside a leather folder stamped with the Rossi family crest. Across the mahogany desk stood Marco Bellini, his oldest friend and the man who had protected him for nearly 15 years. Marco rarely looked nervous. This morning, he did. Our shipment from the eastern docks never arrived. Damiano looked up slowly. Delayed? Marco shook his head. No. Stolen. We found the trucks. And they were empty. Silence settled over the room. That shipment hadn't been ordinary cargo. It had carried millions in diamonds, cash, and confidential documents meant to secure an alliance with another crime family overseas. No ordinary thieves could have intercepted it. Someone had known exactly where it would be, exactly when it would move, exactly how many guards were escorting it. Someone had planned it. How many men? Damiano finally asked. Marco hesitated. 6. Dead. Marco lowered his eyes. Every one of them. Damiano slowly closed the folder. Not once in 8 years had a Rossi convoy disappeared without explanation. Not once. Someone had opened the door from the inside. By breakfast, the news had already spread through the mansion. The laughter that had slowly returned over the past month disappeared almost overnight. Guards spoke in hushed voices. Servants moved more carefully. Every entrance to the estate gained another layer of security. Luna noticed immediately. She looked around the dining room. Why is everybody whispering? Natalie gently buttered a slice of toast. They're just busy today. Luna wasn't convinced. She looked toward Damiano. He had barely touched his breakfast. The newspaper remained folded beside his plate. He wasn't reading. He was thinking. She climbed onto the chair beside him, as she always did. You forgot your smile. He looked down at her. For the first time since she'd met him, he didn't know how to answer. Instead, he reached over and gently brushed a loose curl away from her face. I'll find it. She smiled. I'll help. Natalie watched the exchange quietly. Whatever had happened, it wasn't ordinary. 3 days later, another report arrived. This time it came during dinner. Marco entered without knocking. One look at his face told Damiano everything. What happened? Our warehouse near the river. Damiano stood immediately. What about it? It burned. Accident. Marco shook his head. Explosives. Damiano's expression hardened. Casualties. For guards. His voice became quieter. And Enzo. Damiano stopped moving. Enzo Ricci had served the Rossi family. Since before Damiano inherited the empire, he had taught younger recruits discipline. He had attended every Christmas dinner. He had once carried Damiano to safety after an ambush left him bleeding in the streets. He didn't make it? Marco slowly nodded. They found him protecting the others. For several long seconds, no one spoke. Luna looked between the adults without understanding. Who's Enzo? Natalie gently placed a hand on her shoulder. He was one of Uncle Dom's friends. The little girl's smile faded. Oh. She looked at Damiano. Is your friend in heaven? He swallowed. I hope so. I'll ask God to hug him. The innocence of her words hit him harder than the report itself. He managed a quiet nod. Thank you. The funeral took place beneath gray skies. Dozens of black cars lined the cemetery road. Men who had survived wars lowered their heads in silence as Enzo's coffin disappeared beneath white roses. Damiano remained standing long after everyone else had left. Marco joined him. It keeps getting worse. I know. We've lost 14 men this month. I know. They're always waiting. Damiano looked toward the horizon because someone keeps telling them where to wait. Marco's jaw tightened. You think we got a traitor? I know we do. The attacks became bolder. Another convoy disappeared. A safe house was raided only hours after the location changed. 2 accountants vanished. A weapons cache was discovered by police before anyone inside the organization even knew the address. Every secret stopped being secret. Every plan somehow reached enemy ears. Inside the Rossi mansion, trust began to disappear. Meetings grew shorter. Information became restricted. Even longtime captains found themselves answering questions they had never been asked before. Who knew about the shipment? Who approved the route? Who changed the schedule? Nobody had satisfactory answers. One rainy evening, Damiano sat alone in the security room beneath the mansion. Dozens of surveillance screens glowed against the darkness. Maps covered one wall. Routes, warehouses, safe houses. Each red marker represented another attack. Each blue marker represented another loss. Marco entered carrying another file. I've checked every phone. Anything? No unusual calls. What about finances? Clean. Damiano rubbed tired eyes. They're too perfect. What do you mean? If I were betraying this family. He tapped the desk. I'd make sure every record looked exactly like this. Marco folded his arms. So where do we start? Damiano stared at the map. Not where. Who? Upstairs. The mansion felt strangely different. Doors that once remained open were now locked. Extra guards patrolled every corridor. Metal detectors appeared at staff entrances. Natalie noticed immediately when she passed 2 housekeepers whispering outside the laundry room. They fell silent the moment she approached. Something was changing. Even Luna sensed it. During their evening walk beneath the oak tree, she looked up at Damiano. Why are there so many new guards? They're helping keep everyone safe. From bad people? Yes. She thought carefully. Will they come here? I won't let them. You promise? He crouched until they were eye level. I promise. She wrapped her tiny arms around his neck. I believe you. As she ran off to chase another butterfly, Natalie stepped beside him. She's frightened. So am I. She looked at him, surprised by the honesty. I've buried too many good men. His voice was barely above a whisper. If I don't stop whoever is doing this. He looked toward the mansion. More people will die. Natalie gently touched his arm. For what it's worth. He met her eyes. I still trust you. Those words warmed him for only a moment, because the truth was far more frightening. He no longer knew who else he could trust. Somewhere inside the Rossi Empire, someone was smiling every time another coffin was lowered into ground, and that someone was close enough to hear every plan before Damiano himself had finished making it. The rain that had hung over the city for 2 days finally gave way to warm afternoon sunshine. For the first time that week, the gardens of the Rossi estate came alive again. Butterflies drifted lazily among the roses. Birds sang from the towering oak tree, and the fountain sparkled beneath the bright sky. Luna decided it was a perfect day for hide and seek. You count, she announced, pointing both tiny fingers at Damiano. He looked up from the report he had been pretending to read. I don't believe I agreed to play. You smiled. I did. That means yes. Natalie laughed softly from the garden bench where she was folding freshly washed towels. I think you've already lost the argument. Damiano sighed dramatically. I suppose I have. Luna clapped excitedly. No peeking. She placed both tiny hands over his eyes herself. You count to 20. I thought hide and seek was 10. She gasped. 20 is more fun. As you wish. He leaned against the old oak tree. 1. Luna squealed with delight before running across the lawn. 2. Her tiny shoes bounced over the stone pathway. 3. She disappeared behind a row of flowering hedges. 4. Natalie watched her daughter disappear. Don't go too far, she called. I'm hiding. I know. No looking. Damiano smiled despite himself. 15, 16, 17. The laughter grew fainter. 18, 19, 20. He opened his eyes. I'm coming. Luna had become surprisingly good at hiding. She wasn't behind the fountain, not beneath the swing, not inside the little playhouse the gardeners had secretly built for her. Damiano deliberately searched slowly. He knew she enjoyed believing she was impossible to find. Unknown to everyone else, Luna had chased a small white butterfly farther than usual. The butterfly floated beyond the flower gardens, past the greenhouse, toward an older storage building near the edge of the estate, a place servants rarely visited. The butterfly slipped through a partly open side door. So that's where you live, Luna whispered. She followed it inside. The building smelled of old wood and gardening tools. Dust danced through narrow beams of sunlight leaking between the roof panels. The butterfly disappeared again. Luna wandered deeper between shelves stacked with unused furniture, empty crates and rolls of canvas. Then she heard voices, adult voices. She immediately smiled. Oh, maybe someone else was hiding too. She crouched behind several wooden barrels exactly as her mother had taught her during hide and seek. Only the voices didn't sound playful. He suspects something. The first voice was low, careful. Luna couldn't see the speaker. Another man answered. He suspects everyone. Not enough. The first speaker sounded irritated. The Rossi shipments have become unpredictable. They're still losing men. A third voice laughed quietly. They'll lose more. Luna frowned. Why were they talking about Uncle Dom? She peeked carefully through a narrow gap between two crates. 3 men stood near an old workbench. 2 wore unfamiliar dark coats. The third, she recognized immediately. He worked in the mansion. His neatly pressed gray suit and silver hair were impossible to mistake. It was Vittorio, the elderly butler, the same man who always greeted everyone with polite smiles, the same man who brought Luna warm cookies every evening. She almost waved. Then she remembered. Hide and seek. No talking. The strangers continued speaking. Our people will attack the northern warehouse tomorrow night. Vittorio nodded calmly. They've moved most of the security south. Good. And Rossi? He'll be attending the charity gala. One of the strangers smiled. Perfect timing. Luna tilted her head. They were talking exactly like Marco, and the guards talked during important meetings. Only, they didn't sound like friends. The tallest stranger reached into his coat and placed a thick brown envelope onto the workbench. Vittorio picked it up. Without counting the money, he slipped it inside his jacket. The rest, the stranger said quietly, after Rossi is dead. Luna's little eyes widened. Dead? Why would anyone want Uncle Dom dead? That wasn't nice. Not nice at all. Suddenly the butterfly landed on her nose. She couldn't help herself. She giggled. A tiny sound, barely louder than a whisper. The conversation stopped instantly. Every head turned. Who's there? Luna froze. Heavy footsteps echoed across the wooden floor. She quickly ducked lower behind the barrels, covering her mouth with both hands. One pair of polished shoes came frighteningly close. Another man checked behind the shelves. The butterfly fluttered back out through the broken window. After several tense seconds, the tallest stranger frowned. Probably a bird. Vittorio remained still. His sharp eyes scanned the room one final time. We shouldn't stay here. Agreed. The three men disappeared through the side entrance. Only after their footsteps faded completely did Luna dare breathe again. She waited exactly as long as she thought brave explorers should. Then she quietly slipped back outside. The sunshine suddenly felt much warmer. Far across the gardens, she heard Damiano calling. "Luna, I'm here." She ran toward his voice as fast as her little legs would carry her. Damiano spotted her emerging from behind the greenhouse. "There you are." "I won." "You certainly did." He knelt as she threw herself into his arms. Natalie hurried over moments later. "There you are." She hugged her daughter tightly. "You scared me." "I was hiding." "You hid too well." Luna nodded proudly. "I found 3 men, too." Damiano glanced at her. 3 men. They were playing secret talking. Natalie smiled absent-mindedly. "I'm sure they were gardeners." "No." Luna shook her head. "They weren't dirty." Damiano's expression changed ever so slightly. "What were they doing?" "They were talking about you." His smile disappeared completely. "What did they say?" Luna frowned, trying very hard to remember. "They said..." She looked toward the old storage building. "They said tomorrow night." "What about tomorrow night?" "They said the big house where the boxes are..." She held out both little arms. "The one with lots and lots of boxes." "The warehouse?" Marco asked as he approached from the terrace. Luna pointed excitedly. "Yes." She looked back at Damiano. "They said you're going to a party." "The charity gala," Marco muttered. Luna nodded. "That's it." She smiled proudly. "I remembered." Damiano slowly stood. His heartbeat had begun to quicken. Very few people knew about tomorrow night's gala. Even fewer knew security had been shifted from the northern warehouse. He crouched again. "Luna?" She looked into his eyes. "Did you recognize any of the men?" She smiled brightly. "Of course." "Who was it?" "The nice cookie grandpa." Silence fell across the garden. Marco's face drained of color. Natalie looked confused. "The cookie grandpa?" Luna nodded happily. "The man with shiny shoes." She pointed toward the mansion. "The one who always says, 'Good evening, little princess.'" Damiano and Marco exchanged a single look. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. For weeks they had searched the traitor hidden inside the Rossi Empire. Neither had ever imagined betrayal would be sitting at the front door every evening, smiling politely while welcoming everyone inside. The revelation struck Damiano Rossi like a bullet through the heart. Vittorio, for 23 years, the silver-haired butler had stood faithfully beside the Rossi family. He had poured wine during peace negotiations, welcomed foreign guests, memorized every employee's name, and quietly kept the mansion running while empires rose and fell around it. He had attended Damiano's father's funeral. He had watched Damiano grow from a grieving young man into the head of the Rossi family. And all along, he had been selling them to the enemy. Damiano showed nothing on his face. He simply smiled at Luna and gently brushed a curl away from her forehead. "You've been very helpful today." She beamed proudly. "I remembered everything." "You certainly did." Marco understood immediately. The traitor couldn't know they had discovered him. Not yet. That evening, life inside the mansion appeared perfectly ordinary. Vittorio served dinner with the same calm smile he always wore. He refilled glasses, asked whether the soup was satisfactory, wished everyone a pleasant evening. Only Damiano noticed the tiny details. The butler never once met his eyes. Later that night, Damiano, Marco, and 4 of the family's most trusted captains gathered inside the underground security room. Maps covered the walls. Surveillance monitors glowed in the darkness. Marco pointed to the northern warehouse. "If Luna heard correctly, this is tomorrow night's target." "It is," Damiano replied. Captain Lorenzo frowned. "Then we move everyone." Damiano slowly shook his head. "No." Everyone looked at him. "If we move the guards, Vittorio will know we discovered him." "So what do we do?" We feed him one final lie. A slow smile crossed Marco's face. You wanted to call them. I want every rat to crawl out of it whole. Damiano placed another marker on the map. We'll let them believe the warehouse is lightly defended. And then we end it. The room fell silent. For the first time in weeks, they finally had a plan. Unfortunately, someone else already had one. The following afternoon, while Damiano attended meetings with his captains, Natalie decided to take Luna into the gardens before dinner. The little girl skipped happily along the stone paths, carrying the stuffed butterfly toy Damiano had bought her weeks earlier. Look, Mommy. She held it high. She's flying. Natalie smiled. I see. Uncle Dom said butterflies are brave. I think he was talking about you. Luna giggled. I'm brave because I eat carrots. Natalie laughed. I'm not sure that's how bravery works. As they rounded the far side of the greenhouse, a black delivery van slowly rolled through the service entrance. Natalie frowned. She didn't recognize it. Before she could think another thought, the side door slid open. 3 masked men jumped out. Everything happened at once. One grabbed Natalie from behind. Another covered her mouth. The third lunged toward Luna. The little girl screamed, Mommy. Natalie's heart stopped. Luna! She struggled wildly, kicking and clawing at the man holding her. He slammed her against the van. Stars exploded across her vision. Luna tried to run. Tiny legs pumped as fast as they could. Uncle Dom. Her frightened voice echoed across the gardens. One kidnapper caught her before she'd gone 10 steps. She kicked, bit his hand, hit him with the stuffed butterfly. Let me go. The man cursed. Little monster. He threw the toy aside and lifted her into the van. Natalie broke free for one desperate second. She reached the open door. Luna! A fist struck her across the face. She collapsed onto the gravel. Strong hands dragged her into the vehicle beside her terrified daughter. The doors slammed shut. The van sped away. The butterfly toy lay abandoned in the middle of the garden. At precisely the same moment, hell broke loose across the Rossi Empire. Marco's phone rang. He answered. His face immediately changed. What? Every man inside the security room turned. Our southern docks are under attack. Before anyone could respond, another phone rang. The eastern warehouse is burning. A third call followed seconds later. The harbor convoy has been ambushed. Then another. Our safe house has gone silent. Within less than 2 minutes, every major Rossi operation across the city came under attack. Captain Lorenzo stared at the incoming reports. They're hitting everything. They've divided us, Marco realized. This wasn't about one warehouse. It was never about the warehouse, Damiano said quietly. His own phone vibrated. Unknown number. He answered without speaking. A calm voice greeted him. Good afternoon, Mr. Rossi. Damiano recognized it instantly. Vittorio, I wondered how long it would take. So it was you. I'm afraid your little friend forced my hand. Damiano's eyes hardened. Where are Natalie and Luna? A soft chuckle came through the speaker. So you've already noticed they're gone. The room froze. Damiano's blood ran cold. What did you do? I simply relocated them. If either of them is harmed, you'll do what? The old butler's voice remained infuriatingly calm. You have bigger problems, boss. Explosions echoed faintly through the phone. I imagine your empire is collapsing rather quickly. Damiano didn't care. Tell me where they are. I'll make you a bargain. Silence. You can save your empire. Another pause. Or you can save your little family. The call disconnected. For several seconds, no one spoke. Marco immediately spread another map across the table. We have attacks in 6 different locations. Captain Lorenzo looked at Damiano. If we don't respond now, we'll lose everything. The docks, the warehouses, the accounts, the alliances. Our men need you. Every instinct Damiano had built over 20 years screamed the same answer. Protect the empire. Save the organization. Without the Rossi family, nothing else survived. He looked toward the surveillance monitor, showing the empty garden. On the screen, Luna's stuffed butterfly still lay where it had fallen. A flash of memory crossed his mind. A tiny hand resting on his chest beneath the old oak tree. You're not lonely anymore. Then another. Good morning, sleepy uncle. Another. I believe you. His jaw tightened. The empire had made him powerful. Natalie and Luna had made him human. Marco quietly asked a question no one else dared. What are your orders? Damiano reached for his coat. His voice was calm, cold, absolutely certain. Lorenzo. Yes, boss. You take command of every defensive operation. Lorenzo stared. And you? I'm bringing my family home. The Empire. If my empire cannot survive one night without me, he buttoned his jacket, then it doesn't deserve to survive. He picked up Luna's forgotten butterfly from the security monitor table after one of the guards retrieved it from the garden, holding the small stuffed toy in his hand. The most feared mafia boss in the city walked toward the exit, not as a king protecting his throne, but as a father determined to rescue the two people he loved most. Behind him, the Rossi Empire continued to burn. Ahead of him waited the greatest battle of his life. Warehouse 12 stood abandoned at the edge of the old industrial district, its rusted steel walls silhouetted against a moonlit sky. Years ago, freight trains had thundered through its loading docks. Now only broken windows, twisted metal, and silence remained. To anyone passing by, it looked forgotten. To Damiano Rossi, it looked exactly like a place chosen by someone who wanted bodies to disappear without questions. His black SUV rolled to a silent stop 200 meters away. Marco studied the warehouse through a pair of binoculars. Lookouts on the roof. I see them. 2 by the western entrance. Damiano nodded. Snipers? At least 3. Marco lowered the binoculars. It's a fortress. Damiano looked toward the warehouse, his expression unreadable. No. He chambered a round into his pistol. It's a prison. He stepped out of the vehicle. Behind him, 12 of the Rossi family's most loyal men quietly emerged from the darkness. None of them spoke. They had all heard the same order before leaving the estate. Natalie and Luna came first. Nothing else mattered. Damiano raised one hand. The men spread out like shadows, disappearing behind abandoned containers and broken machinery. The night held its breath. Then, a gunshot shattered the silence. One of the rooftop guards collapsed before he even realized he had been spotted. The second barely turned before Marco's rifle found its mark. Move! Damiano shouted. The warehouse exploded into chaos. Automatic gunfire erupted from shattered windows. Bullets tore through rusted steel, showering sparks across the loading yard. The Rossi men pushed forward with disciplined precision, taking cover behind concrete barriers as they returned fire. Damiano advanced straight through the center. He didn't hesitate. He didn't slow down. Every step brought him closer to Natalie and Luna. Another gunman appeared behind an overturned forklift. Damiano fired twice. The man dropped his weapon and fell behind the machinery. An explosion rocked the eastern wall as Lorenzo's team breached another entrance. Smoke rolled through the building. The firefight intensified. Inside the warehouse, Natalie clutched Luna tightly against her chest. They had been tied to heavy steel support columns near the center of the enormous building. Luna buried her face against her mother's shoulder every time another burst of gunfire echoed through the darkness. Mommy? Natalie kissed the top of her head. It's okay. Her own voice trembled. He's coming. You think Uncle Dom will find us? I know he will. She prayed she wasn't lying. Across the room, Vittorio calmly adjusted his cuffs as though the battle outside had nothing to do with him. The rival syndicate's leader, Salvatore Costa, stood beside him watching the security monitors. They're inside already. Vittorio smiled faintly. I told you he'd come. You sound pleased. I've watched that boy for 23 years. His eyes never left the screen. I wanted to see what he'd choose. And he chose love. Salvatore laughed. Then he chose poorly. The warehouse doors exploded inward. Damiano entered first. Smoke curled around him as flashes of gunfire lit the darkness. His eyes immediately searched the room. Then he saw them. Natalie, Luna, alive. Relief surged through him so powerfully it almost weakened his knees. Dom! Natalie's voice cut through the noise. He started toward them. Halfway across the warehouse, Vittorio stepped calmly into the open. The old butler no longer looked gentle. He looked cold, empty. You disappoint me. Damiano stopped. You betrayed my father. I serve your father. You sold us. I saved myself. Gunfire continued all around them as the two men stared at each other. I gave this family 23 years. Vittorio's voice remained steady. What did loyalty earn me? You never wanted loyalty. No. The old man smiled bitterly. I wanted respect. You had it. I had obedience. He slowly drew a pistol from beneath his jacket. You never once saw me. Damiano raised his own weapon. You should have walked away. I almost did. Vittorio glanced toward Luna. Until that little girl recognized me. Silence settled between them. There was no other choice. He pulled the trigger. The shot echoed through the warehouse. Damiano moved instinctively. So did Natalie. Without thinking, she threw herself sideways. The bullet meant for Damiano struck her shoulder instead. She cried out as she crashed against the concrete floor. "Mommy!" Luna screamed. Everything inside Damiano broke. Natalie. His roar echoed across the warehouse. Time seemed to stop. Then something inside him became terrifyingly calm. He advanced. Another of Vittorio's shots missed as Damiano closed the distance. The old butler stumbled backwards. For the first time that night, fear appeared in his eyes. "You should have stayed down," he whispered. Damiano didn't answer. He kept walking. Salvatore's remaining men rushed forward. Marco and the Rossi soldiers intercepted them. Another fierce exchange of gunfire erupted, echoing beneath the steel roof. One by one, the rival gunmen were overwhelmed. The balance of the battle shifted. Seeing his men falling, Salvatore tried to escape through a rear loading door. Lorenzo stepped into his path. "It's over." The syndicate leader lowered his weapon, slowly, then suddenly fired. Lorenzo ducked. Marco answered with a single shot that knocked the pistol from Salvatore's hand. Within seconds, the rival leader was surrounded. He dropped to his knees. Across the warehouse, Vittorio realized there was nowhere left to run. He looked toward Damiano one final time. "I helped raise you. You also destroyed everything my father built. I gave you strength. You gave me pain." Vittorio slowly lowered his head. "I suppose that's true." He made one final desperate movement toward the pistol lying near his feet. Damiano reacted first. A single shot struck the concrete beside the weapon, stopping him in his tracks. The old man looked up. The fight had left him. Security officers moved in, disarming and restraining him as the last resistance inside the warehouse collapsed. The war was over. Damiano threw his weapon aside and rushed to Natalie. She sat against a support column, pressing one trembling hand against her wounded shoulder. Blood stained the sleeve of her blouse, but she remained conscious. "You idiot," she whispered weakly through tears. He knelt beside her. "You took a bullet for me." She managed the faintest smile. "I wasn't about to let Luna lose another person she loves." His hands shook as he untied the ropes binding her wrists. Luna threw herself into his arms the moment she was free. "I knew you'd come." He held her tightly, unable to speak. The little girl wrapped both arms around his neck. "I wasn't scared." He smiled through eyes filled with emotion. "I know." She looked toward her mother. "Mommy's bleeding. We're going to fix that." Paramedics rushed into the warehouse moments later. As they carefully lifted Natalie onto a stretcher, she reached for Damiano's hand. He took it immediately. She squeezed his fingers. "You kept your promise." He looked at Luna standing safely beside them, then back at Natalie. "No." His voice was quiet but full of conviction. "We kept it." As dawn's first light broke over the shattered warehouse, the last rival gunman surrendered. The kidnappers were defeated. The conspiracy that had nearly destroyed the Rossi family was over. For the first time in many years, Damiano Rossi looked around and saw something greater than victory. He saw the family he had almost lost, and he silently vowed that no empire, no matter how powerful, would ever come before them again. Morning sunlight spilled gently across the Rossi estate, bathing the ancient oak tree in warm gold. The same branches that had once sheltered a lonely man pretending to sleep now swayed peacefully in the summer breeze, their leaves whispering softly as though they remembered everything that had happened beneath them. The mansion no longer felt like a fortress. The heavy silence that had haunted its halls for years had disappeared. In its place came laughter. Real laughter. Housekeepers chatted while arranging fresh flowers in crystal vases. The kitchen echoed with the sounds of baking bread and cheerful conversation. Gardeners argued playfully over where to plant another patch of wildflowers because Luna insisted butterflies deserved the prettiest restaurants in the whole world. Even the security guards had changed. They still stood watch. They still carried weapons. But now they greeted one another with smiles instead of grim nods. Peace had done what fear never could. It had given the estate a heartbeat. Upstairs, Natalie stood before the bedroom mirror, carefully fastening the last button of a pale blue dress. The wound in her shoulder had healed remarkably well, though the doctor had insisted she avoid lifting anything heavy for another few weeks. She flexed her arm carefully. There was still a faint ache, a reminder of the night she had stepped between a bullet and the man she loved. A quiet knock interrupted her thoughts. "Mommy?" The door opened before she could answer. Luna skipped into the room wearing a white dress decorated with tiny embroidered butterflies. Uncle Dom says we're having a surprise picnic. Natalie smiled. A surprise? He wouldn't tell me why. Did you ask? I asked 7 times. Natalie laughed. And he said surprises stop being surprises if people keep talking. He's right. I still tried. Of course she had. Luna reached up and took her mother's hand. Come on. She lowered her voice dramatically. I think he's nervous. Natalie frowned. Nervous? He keeps fixing his tie. Outside, Damiano stood beneath the old oak tree, adjusting his tie for what felt like the 20th time. Marco watched from a distance, struggling to hide his amusement. I've seen you negotiate with international syndicates without blinking. Damiano sighed. I preferred that. Marco laughed openly. So the fearless Damiano Rossi is frightened. I'm not frightened. No. Marco folded his arms. You've adjusted your tie 6 times in the last minute. Damiano glanced down. I have. You also asked whether flowers should be moved half an inch to the left. They looked uneven. They didn't. Damiano rubbed the back of his neck. I've never done this before. Marco's expression softened. I know. From the pocket of his jacket, Damiano removed a small velvet box. Inside rested an elegant ring that had belonged to his mother. She had once told him that true strength wasn't measured by the battles a man won, but by the family he protected. For years, he hadn't understood those words. Now, he finally did. Luna burst through the garden doors first. There you are. She ran toward him at full speed. Damiano caught her effortlessly, lifting her into the air until she squealed with laughter. You look handsome. So do you. She leaned closer and whispered loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. You don't have to be nervous. Marco turned away, pretending to admire the roses while trying not to laugh. Damiano smiled helplessly. I'll remember that. Natalie followed a few moments later. When she stepped into the garden, she stopped. The oak tree had been decorated with simple white flowers woven delicately among the lower branches. A picnic blanket rested beneath its shade. Fresh flowers surrounded it. Nothing extravagant, nothing excessive, just beautiful. Her eyes slowly found Damiano. He stood waiting beneath the same tree where Luna had first climbed onto his chest all those weeks ago. The place where everything had changed. You did all this? He nodded. I wanted to bring us back to where our story began. Luna slipped from his arms. I'm going to catch butterflies. Without waiting for permission, she ran laughing through the meadow, chasing a bright yellow butterfly dancing between the flowers. Her joyful laughter drifted through the gardens. Damiano watched her for a moment before turning back to Natalie. I used to come here because it was the only place I could pretend the world didn't exist. His voice was calm. I'd lie beneath this tree and close my eyes, hoping that for a few minutes I wouldn't have to be the man everyone feared. Natalie listened quietly. I thought being alone made me strong. He looked toward the mansion. I built walls so high that no one could reach me. His gaze returned to hers. Then one little girl ignored every wall I'd ever built. Natalie smiled through tears. She does have that talent. She climbed onto my chest without knowing my name. He laughed softly. She looked at me and saw someone who needed company. His eyes glistened. Not a monster. He took a slow step closer. She reminded me that I still had a heart. Another step. You reminded me it was worth protecting. He gently took both of Natalie's hands in his own. They say love makes a man weak. He shook his head. They're wrong. I've never been stronger than I am standing here with you. Natalie's eyes filled with tears. She no longer tried to hide. Damiano slowly lowered himself onto one knee. The garden seemed to fall completely silent. He opened the velvet box. The diamond caught the afternoon sunlight, sparkling beneath the ancient branches. Natalie Marino, his voice wavered for the first time. I cannot promise that life with me will always be easy. She smiled softly. I know. I cannot erase the man I used to be. I don't want you to erase him. I can only promise to spend every day becoming a better man than I was the day before. A tear rolled down Natalie's cheek. You and Luna gave me something I believed I'd never deserve. He looked toward the little girl, still chasing butterflies across the lawn. A family. His eyes returned to Natalie. So, he took a steadying breath. Will you marry me? For a heartbeat, the world stood still. Natalie laughed through happy tears. You really thought I was going to say no? Damiano's smile widened. I wasn't entirely certain. She reached down and gently touched his face. You gave my daughter a home. She swallowed the emotion rising in her throat. You gave me hope. She nodded. Yes. His shoulders relaxed with a breath he felt he'd been holding for years. Yes, Damiano. Yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Before either of them could say another word, a tiny voice rang out across the garden. She said yes. Luna came sprinting back, waving both arms wildly. I saw everything. She threw herself between them, wrapping her tiny arms around both at once. We're a family now. Damiano lifted Luna into one arm, while pulling Natalie close with the other. For a long moment, none of them spoke. They simply stood beneath the old oak tree, surrounded by sunlight, laughter, and peace. Around them, the staff watching discreetly from the mansion porch broke into heartfelt applause. Even Marco wiped discreetly at his eyes before clearing his throat and pretending he had dust in them. Damiano looked up into the branches overhead. Months earlier, he had come to this very place believing solitude was the only way to survive. Now he understood the truth. Strength was not found in power. It was found in the courage to love despite every reason to fear losing it. The feared Mafia boss who had once hidden beneath the oak tree no longer needed to pretend he was asleep. His heart had awakened. And beneath the same ancient branches where a fearless little girl had offered a lonely stranger her trust, Damiano Rossi found the greatest victory of his life. Not in defeating his enemies, but in becoming the husband and father he had never believed he could be.